on share cafes, hidden gems. Well, Trigg Mining, like the other companies you've heard this morning, is a fairly new kid on the ASX. We listed 2.5 years ago, but the founding principle years before that was about building natural resource projects communities can be proud of. And I'm here to talk about the discovery that we've made and the project that we really are going to be very proud of for not only the shareholders and stakeholders of Trigg, but this is a substantial project and potential new industry as well for Australia. So next two slides are our disclosures and disclaimers. And then I'll just quickly give you a background to the corporate structure. So as I said, we listed 2.5 years ago. We have a market cap at the moment of about $9 million. And today we just announced an oversubscribed rights issue of $4 million. And in January, we received $1 million in R&D rebate, which takes our cash balance to approximately $7 million, which is really surprising given what I'm about to talk about and the scale of what I'm talking about with an enterprise value of $7 million. We've got a board and management team that's well equipped to develop this project. And I'm really excited to start talking about the scoping study. Next slide. So Lakes Russell, I'm talking about sulphate of potash. As Tim said, it's a really essential fertiliser for global food security and also for carbon farming. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But where are the projects? We're in Western Australia. I grew up here. I went to university in Kalgoorlie, so this is my backyard. The projects are about 170 kilometres east of Laverton. And they sit on the Great Central Road, in particular Lakes Russell, which is our flagship project and the really big discovery I'm talking about mostly today. That road is being upgraded to become the Outback Highway, which is becoming increasingly important for reliable logistics across Australia. As we've just heard in the last few weeks, there's been a flood event across Central Australia that's taken out the railway and the highways, and that will be a really important trade route, and that goes right past our mine gate. We also have access to rail there down at Leonora and access to ports and external markets, international markets as well as local markets through that. So at the moment we have a total drainable mineral resource of 14.4 million tonnes, but I know that doesn't mean much at this stage because there's not a lot to benchmark against, but it really is a substantial scale project. It's also high grade and we've updated the resource last year. So I'll just reflect that, in fact, we announced this maiden resource in May last year. So all this is happening very, very fast. We've drilled now the first 36 kilometres and the rest of the tenure in the project was recently granted in January, which takes the strike length up to 70 kilometres. Next slide. So the scoping study, and what I'm really excited to talk about is those results. Like this 245,000 tonne per annum project is large scale. In fact, it puts us in the top 10 global producers. It has an initial mine life of 21 years for a capex of 378 and gives us a cash cost of about 341 Australian dollars, but 249 US dollars a tonne, which gives us a really substantial margin. Our scoping study was based on an SOP price of 550 US dollars a tonne, but I'll also talk about in this presentation just what's been happening in the fertiliser price market, and we can see the impact of what that will have on the NPV. Next slide. So Lakes Russell, as I said, this is a global scale discovery in the last year. It is a top 10 potential producer and also lowest cost quartile. And with that initial mine life of 21 years, it's depleting 41%, 44% of the total drainable resource. That's potential for this to expand as we continue to expand the exploration. Next slide. It's also incredibly important, not just because Australia imports all of its potassium. We need it for our agricultural output. We are talking here in Western Australia of record grain exports, but for example, 5% of the wheat grain that we export is potassium. So we really do need to be continuing to put good quality fertilisers back into our soils to enrich them. This, from a mining perspective, is about harvesting naturally occurring potassium-rich brine. So it's taking what is drainable from the resource, which is still active. So it's draining the very big drainage systems of the desert, concentrating it in the evaporation system of the salt lakes and the paleo valleys. And we're looking at taking what is drainable from that. So there's no large open pit, there's no rock waste dump. So overall, we'll have a light environmental footprint with this project that can be rehabilitated as well when mine closure comes. It's about harvesting solar energy. So pumping water out of the ground, evaporating the water, concentrating the salts, and taking it, all those salts, so they're electrolyte salts, all the way through to sulphate of potash or potassium sulphate. So it's a natural product and it will have low greenhouse gas emissions. Currently at the scoping study stage, we're talking about 0.17 tonnes per CO2 equivalent per tonne of product. And we're looking at ways to reduce that even further in the pre-feasibility study. From an agricultural perspective, this is where it really has great impact because it can have a really positive effect on carbon farming outcomes by substituting the current muriate of potash, potassium chloride. It eliminates the chloride, which is poisonous for soils and waterways. So it will increase the health of soils and waterways. Drought tolerance. The potassium and the sulphur are incredibly important for the plants, for their tolerance to drought, as well as frost resistance. So it gives you a more robust agricultural output. And it is quality of produce too. Potassium is what makes things taste really great. So it increases the nutritional benefit of the food that we're eating. Socially, we've got a long life project out there. We're on Nuttinjara lands. There's high unemployment. And one of the great opportunities we have is through that time, employing local people for the 114 site-based roles. It's a long life project, so state and federal taxes feed into this as well, native title and state royalty payments. So it's a whole of community project. There's potential for sustained community programs as well with that life of mine. And our mine closure planning is happening right now as well. The company was founded by me, and 50% of our board and senior leadership team are women. And from a governance perspective, we've treated this from the very beginning as an ASX listed company and have very strong contemporary corporate policies and risk management frameworks. So we really are building mines communities can be proud of. Next slide. So Lake Throssell is an area of just over 1,000 square kilometres now with the grant of the additional tenements. We've drilled on that central tenement, which is E383065. We have a resource of 14.4 million tonnes and additional exploration targets. So this is not the end of the story yet. There's a lot more work to do. And we're very excited that $7 million in the bank is going to give us a great opportunity to really do a huge amount of work in this field season that's coming up. And that's all about increasing that confidence in the resource, expanding the resource information as well, starting on doing the evaporation trials for the pre-feasibility study and really moving forward on that pre-feasibility study for this project. Next slide. At Lake Yeo, which is really interesting addition to our tenure in recent times, is an interpreted continuation of the Paleo Valley from Lake Throssell, where there's regional information that suggests that it does a bit of a U-turn and swings back into Lake Yeo. So, and also the radiometric potassium information, as well as the aster-gypsum index, both indicate to us that it could well be another repeat of Lake Throssell. So we really have only scratched the surface exploration-wise on what we're doing out there. And we're already talking about a mine with a 21-year mine life and top 10 global production. So watch this space for all the exploration that's yet to come this year. Next slide. So as I talked about, some things are happening in the fertiliser space. Traditionally, we've really seen SOP being quite a sustained $500 to $550 a tonne for many, many years. And it's trading at a premium over muriate because there's this secondary process that creates a price floor called Mannheim, where they buy muriate, add sulfuric acid and heat it to about 800 degrees to then manufacture sulphate of potash. So it's an environmentally taxing process. It's also very expensive. So SOP has a price floor. But with the price changes and the global impact and supply shortages, we're seeing increased demand because we're seeing increased commodity prices. We're also seeing a bit of global uncertainty and also domestic policies around prevention of export. So the global market around fertiliser is really expanding, and that's having a big impact on the price of SOP. And in fact, our scoping study, when we published it, we used $550 a tonne. But for every 10% increase in that, we have $144 million impact on our MPV. And you can see where the price is going at the moment. The next slide. This reinforces it over, and sorry, the font looks a little bit small today on that, but what this slide is showing is just the impact of what is happening across agricultural commodities. So we hear a lot about the battery commodities. Lithium, yes, it is absolutely going gangbusters at the moment in the last year, but we're also seeing quite a growth there in nitrogen, muriate of potash, sulphate of potash, and phosphate. That's your key nutrients for plant growth. And we're also seeing those increases in commodity prices as well. So it really is booming in the fertiliser space. Next slide. So to sum up, Lake Throstle is set to become a top 10 global producer and is already sitting in the lowest cost quartile through that natural endowment of solar evaporation to produce a natural product. It has outstanding economics. Oh, can we go back? Thank you. For a multi-decade operation with significant exploration potential at Lake Throstle itself and 35 kilometres to the south at Lake Yo. It is located in the world-class mining jurisdiction of Western Australia. It is Australian-made premium product for food security. It's a natural potassium fertiliser with low greenhouse gas emissions suitable for all agriculture and also for addressing things like carbon farming, where by using sulphate of potash, farmers can increase the root growth on their crop and still produce the food from the surface, but capture that carbon in the soil and address climate change. So we have the pre-feasibility study underway. Offtake discussions are also underway, and it's really exciting year ahead as we really get cracking on all the field work for that pre-feasibility study. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Keren. It's come a long way. Congratulations on that oversubscribed rights issue. Maybe we start there. There's $4 million there allocated. Can you target where those funds will go? You kind of spoke big picture, but could you be a bit more targeted?
Yeah, we're going to do the first key part of all of the field work from a resource perspective is to now put in some water bores and pump test the aquifer. So we have the resource there, but we need to increase that confidence to be able to transfer that to an oil reserve in the pre-feasibility study. So that's an important part of it. Prior to that, we anticipate also doing an air core program to further refine the location of the water bores. So that'll add some exploration results. And we've got the evaporation trial underway already. So we'll have results of that coming up when that is complete. And also continuing the environmental approvals for this project. So we started that in April last year, even before we announced the resource, because we had a sense that we had something of real scale, so that we can get ahead of the curve there on the environmental approvals process.
And the pricing chart you showed, I mean, everyone's talking lithium, and you're right, the agricultural products are kind of a bit out of sight. Can you talk through why that kind of pricing of sulphate of potash has gone from a floor to growing very quickly? What's changed in the pricing structure?
So a number of the inputs when it comes to production of SOP as the Mannheim process. So we've seen energy prices rise globally. We've seen the muriate prices rise globally. And part of that is because of things like the disturbance with Russia. There's been sanctions on Belarus, and Belarus is one of the world's larger producers of muriate. So it's becoming increasingly hard to get your hands on both potassium fertilisers globally. Other things where, like China has changed its policies around domestic export. So it's about keeping the product locally so they can use it locally and not export it to the rest of the world. So there's becoming less supply on the global trade.
And is there any, sorry, go on.
I was also going to say, as commodity prices increase as well, farmers feel more relaxed about using fertiliser, understand that they need it, and they want to increase their yields, so they will use more fertiliser as well.
And is there anyone globally, company-wise, that investors can look to that are producing SOP and the market mechanics behind that? Is there somewhere they can look to?
It's quite an opaque space because there are not a lot of public companies that share that type of information. Europe is a large producer of SOP. Compass Minerals in North America would be a similar analogue to what we're looking at doing here in Australia. And the lithium brines as well, even in South America, are a very similar process. The difference, though, for Western Australia is the high evaporation rate. So at Compass Minerals, they have about 1 metre a year. And in Western Australia, we have 3 to 4 metres a year, which accelerates that evaporation for us.
And there's been a few missteps, for want of a better word, in the space in Western Australia. Is there some key learnings from that at the moment?
Oh, absolutely. Like, Trigg has always been about being the second mover, and because this is new, this is entirely new industry. It's a new approach to producing minerals, and we really need to develop that IP within the country, but also within our companies. And what we're doing here at Trigg is watching and learning, and being more efficient with our use of funds as we go. So it's very much about being a second mover here for Trigg.
And finally, just one question. What's the kind of project timeline? Can you elaborate a little bit more?
Well, we really want to make sure we do this right. This is a really big project with a long mine life. We're going through all of the study phases, again, learning the lessons, not to cut those corners, make sure that we do the scoping, then the pre-feasibility study and feasibility study. And at this stage, we have a timetable that indicates that we may be in a position to make a final investment decision in 2025.